This is a short presentation from Chapter 25 of the Hospital Corpsman Manual on the Decedent Affairs Program, and it's just focused on the responsibilities and the actual programs that fall under Decedent Affairs. I'm going to divide the Decedent Affairs chapter into several small little sections. So first off, let's define what Decedent Affairs is. Decedent Affairs Program consists of the search, recovery, identification, care, and disposition of the remains of deceased personnel for whom the Department of the Navy is responsible. It's a highly visible and extremely sensitive program, and arrangements for the burial of deceased should be conducted in an expedient but dignified manner, and survivals of the deceased should be given the greatest possible amount of support and assistance. Further information on the Decedent Affairs Program can be found in OpNav Instruction 5360.1. Responsibilities. We're going to talk about the responsibilities of Navy Mortuary Affairs, the Decedent Affairs Officers, Naval Hospitals, and small independent operational units as it pertains to Decedent Affairs. Navy Mortuary Affairs, that's your overall manager for the Navy and the Marine Corps Decedent Affairs Program, and it's located in Millington, Tennessee. Your Decedent Affairs Officer at the local level, they're going to be responsible for inspecting remains, briefing escorts, making travel arrangements, selecting locations, coordinating burials at sea, and that'll do it. Naval Hospitals, well, they're going to manage any deaths that occur within the hospital in the local or their local area of responsibility. Small independent operational units, their Decedent Affairs Program is going to be carried out by the commanding officer, the officer in charge, a medical service corps officer, or possibly a senior corpsman, and they're going to work under the guidance of Navy Mortuary Affairs. There's 5 programs we're going to talk about when it comes to Decedent Affairs. That's the Current Death Program, the Graves Registration Program, Concurrent Return Program, the Return of Remains Program, and the Casualty Assistance Call Program. First program we're going to discuss is the Current Death Program. The Current Death Program is operational on a worldwide basis during peacetime, but may also be used during major conflicts. So this would be the program right now that would be responsible for administering the Decedent Affairs Program, the Current Death Program. The Current Death Program is going to provide for mortuary services, supplies, service and care and disposition of remains. Remains will be shipped under the Current Death Program to a place designated by the primary next of kin. We're going to refer to our primary next of kin also as the Person Authorized Direct Disposition, or the PAD. The Person Authorized Direct Disposition serves as a person who will direct all activities having to do with the deceased. They're going to be making all the decisions: what burial clothes the person will be put in, where the person is going to be buried, whether or not the person is going to be buried or cremated. That person is the one who makes the decisions. The Person Authorized Direct Disposition. The decedent, personnel's effects, their stuff, their all the remaining stuff, that will be shipped to the legal recipient under the Current Death Program. Graves Registration Program. So the Graves Registration Program, abbreviated GR or GRREG, is only operational when authorized by a responsible commander during major military operations. Okay, so if something was going on overseas and the casualty rate was, exceedingly high, and we couldn't necessarily get everybody back to the United States, for proper disposition of their remains, that might be a time when Graves registration is activated, that part of the Decedent Affairs Program. So it includes the establishment and maintenance of temporary burial sites. It's going to provide search, recovery, evacuation, temporary cemetery, initial identification of the remains, and disposition of personal effects, and then burial in a temporary cemetery. Okay, so again, Graves registration, it's only operational when authorized by a responsible commander, and it's going to be used during major military operations. All right, the Concurrent Returns Program. The Concurrent Returns Program combines the Current Death Program and the Graves Registrations Program. The Concurrent Return Program normally becomes operational when large numbers of military personnel are committed to a strategic area, and we've already got that Graves program started. So remains buried in temporary cemeteries under the Graves registration will be disinterred, right? They'll be unburied and evacuated if conditions and capabilities permit that to be. It's going to provide for search, recovery, evacuation, and to the remains to a certain processing point, and then it's going to provide for preparation of the remains in a mortuary, and then shipment for permanent disposition to the final destination as determined by the person authorized direct disposition, the PAD or the PADD. The Return of Remains Program. The Return of Remains Programs provides for permanent disposition of remains of persons buried in temporary cemeteries who could not be evacuated under the Concurrent Return Program. Okay, so this would be like a little bit later down the line. For whatever reason, the Concurrent Return Program couldn't get the deceased members, back to the United States. The Return of Remains Program could be activated. What we need to know about the Return of Remains Program is that it's only activated upon special legislation, okay? So legislation may authorize the establishment of one or more permanent American cemeteries in an overseas area. So with the Return of Remains Program, we can actually make permanent overseas cemeteries, or under the Return of Remains Program, the deceased who weren't evacuated back to the United States and that are in temporary cemeteries under the graves, well, the Return of Remains Program can also give the person authorized disposition of the deceased the option to have those remains buried there in those cemeteries, or placed in another place, like brought all the way back to the United States. So our four programs that we've gone over so far, the current death program first, right? That's the one that's operational during peacetime, sometimes during conflict as well. The graves registration program, the operational commander can authorize this one if major military operations are occurring, and this is the one that kind of sets up those temporary cemeteries, initial identification, and temporary cemeteries. The concurrent return program, that's going to combine the current death program and the graves registration program to bring, to unearth those temporary cemeteries and bring those remains back. And then if it happens later on down the line, we couldn't get somebody back under the concurrent return program, well, then the return of remains program can be enacted, and we got to understand that one is only enacted with special legislation, so Congress would have to actually pass that. And also the return of remains program can establish permanent American cemeteries in overseas locations. And one thing else we got to talk about, when activated, the chief of BUMED, right, the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, is responsible for notifying the field activities of its activation. Moving on to the Casualty Assistance Call Program. So the Casualty Assistance Call Program is going to be administered by the Chief of Naval Operations Personnel Command and the Commandant of the Marine Corps when it pertains to Marines. It's integrally related to the Decedent Affairs Program, but we got to understand that the Casualty Assistance Call Program is not part of the Decedent Affairs Program. It's actually managed by BUMED Instruction 1770.1 as opposed to the OPNAV Instruction 5360.1 that deals with Decedent Affairs. The Casualty Assistance Call Program is going to detail the CACO, or a Casualty Assistance Call Officer, to personally contact the person authorized direct disposition, right, that primary next of kin. Your CACO is usually going to be a commissioned officer or a senior enlisted member. And what they're responsible for is they need to help the person authorized direct disposition and the secondary next of kin with any problems surrounding the death, and they need to provide information on the disposition of remains to include funeral planning, death gratuity and unpaid pay and allowances, shipment of the service members' personal effects, claim documents to aid in the movement of the decedent's estate, like wills, bank accounts, property savings, bonds, or any other kind of commercial insurance. And they also are going to be responsible for helping with SGLI, right, your service group life insurance, and travel for all eligible dependents to the gravesite funeral service, and final move and permanent residence, so where the remains are going to be put to rest. Okay, let's review what we've gone over so far. So our programs we talked about the current death program, we talked about the graves registration program, we talked about the concurrent return program, and we talked about the return of remains program, and we also talked about the Casualty Assistance Call Program. So which program Which program provides for the search, recovery, and evacuation to temporary cemeteries and is only operational when authorized by the responsible commanding officer during major military operations? Search, recovery, evacuation to temporary cemetery, operational during by the commander during major military operations. Well, that's our Graves Registration Program. Graves Registration Program, temporary cemeteries, operational when an operational commander says so during a major military operation. Which program is activated only upon enactment of special legislation and can establish permanent American cemeteries in overseas locations? Which one of our programs takes special legislation and only and can establish permanent American cemeteries in overseas locations? That would be the Return of Remains Program. Return of Remains Program. Which program remains buried in remains buried in temporary cemeteries are disinterred, right, dug up and evacuated if conditions and capabilities permit, returned back to the states if conditions permit? That is going to, and also combines two other programs. That's going to be our Concurrent Return Program. Concurrent Return Program. Which program is normally operational on a worldwide basis during peacetime, but may also be used during major conflicts and provides professional mortuary services, supplies, and related service incident to the care and disposition of the remains? Well, that is our Current Death Program. And finally, which program designates personnel to help the personal authorized direct disposition and the secondary next of kin with problems surrounding the death and provides information on death gratuity and unpaid allowances? That's going to be our Casualty Assistance Call Program. All right, a couple more questions here. Who's the overall manager of the Navy and the Marine Corps Decedent Affairs Program? The overall manager of the Navy and the Marine Corps Decedent Affairs Program is Navy Mortuary Affairs. Who, in small independent operational units, who is responsible for managing the Decedent Affairs Program? In small independent operational units, who's going to manage the Decedent Affairs Program? That's going to be your commanding officer, officer in charge, maybe a medical service corps officer, or the senior corpsman. Who administers the Casualty Assistance Call Program? Who administers the Casualty Assistance Call Program? That's going to be the Chief of Naval Operations Personnel Command and the Commandant of the Marine Corps when we're dealing with Marines. All right, that concludes this presentation. Like I mentioned, I'm going to split Decedent Affairs into several small pieces, small presentations, and just get it a little piece at a time. Keep studying, and I hope this helps.